Just 1 week ago, as we here at CBE began our Purim celebrations, we also began reading the book of Leviticus. This book is both the shortest in length and contains the most amount of mitzvot, commandments, than any other book in the Torah. And it is also notorious amongst our people for these many, many commandments. Portion after portion about the intricacies of sacrifices, the dread on the faces of B'nai Mitzvah students as they find out that they must speak out loud in front of their family and friends about these burnt sacrifices, or commandments about the sprinkling of blood, or laws around purity and impurity, or about scaly skin disease. And perhaps a similar dread on the faces of clergy and clergy students as they prepare to lead their communities on Shabbat. Last week's portion started us on this path, providing us with the details of the 5 main types of sacrifices that the Israelites must perform. And this week's Torah portion, Tzav, picks up right where last week ended, except these are supplemental instructions meant specifically for Aaron and the priests. We read again and again, Zot HaTorah. This is the teaching, or this is the ritual, the instructions for all the different kinds of sacrifices that the priests must perform on behalf of the people. And our Torah provides that specific procedure for the ritual. For example, this is the ritual of the burnt offering. The burnt offering itself shall remain where it is burned upon the altar all night until morning, while the fire on the altar is kept going on it. The priest shall dress in linen raiment with linen breeches next to his body, and he shall take up the ashes to which the fire has reduced the burnt offering on the altar and place them beside the altar. He shall then take off his vestments and put on other vestments and carry the ashes outside the camp to a pure place. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning, not to go out. Every morning the priest shall feed wood to it, lay out the burnt offering on it, and turn into smoke the fat parts of the offering of well-being. In Torah, the word for sacrifice is korban. The root letters of this word mean to come close or to draw near. So anytime that we're thinking about these sacrifices, all of the specificities of them, it's important to remember that their purpose is to bring the people close to God. And yet, they can still feel pretty foreign to us. As Bible scholar Robert Alter astutely notes, most of the laws are focused on topics that may seem less than urgent to audiences not part of the ancient world in which they were framed, to say the very least. So if these sacrifices that fill the book of Leviticus were framed and understood for this ancient context, how could we think about them in 2024? Well, tonight, I'd like to try and argue that the processes for this sacrificial ritual system draw some parallels to our modern-day ritual system of voting. Let me explain. The sacrifices were supposed to be completed at a particular time and under a particular circumstance. Our election system has specified times in which we should vote and includes provisions for when we need to have a special election. The sacrifices required being at the altar, sometimes specifying even which part of the altar. And we all have our assigned polling places, and the voting booth, that's our altar. The sacrifices all have an intention, a particular purpose for making that sacrifice among the variety of options. When we vote, we come in with an intention. Hopefully we've done some research before, choosing a particular candidate that we hope represents us well. And the priests wearing all of their specific garments, well, maybe we don't have an outfit, but we do get a little sticker every time we go to vote. Most importantly, though, both the sacrificial rituals of the Torah and our modern-day voting rituals are systems that allow us to do something, to take action, in order to create a little more wholeness in our community. The second time ever that I was able to vote in a presidential election in this country was 2016. Earlier in the year, I graduated from the University of Kansas, and that fall, I had just moved to the Upper West Side. I remember walking out of my apartment on Election Day and being thrilled to see so many people in line to vote at the middle school around the corner from me. Like so many of us, that fall had felt incredibly stressful. Watching the debates, following the headlines, trying not to freak out at every poll from 538. Before walking into that voting booth to participate in this modern American ritual, I felt I had done my duty. I had registered in my new city and state, and I'd also texted friends to make sure that they were registered and had a plan to vote. I was incredibly nervous, but I also felt really proud to be able to participate in this ritual, a ritual that in the past had kept so many of my ancestors from participating. And yet, by the next morning, it was clear I had not done enough. We had not done enough to keep a volatile, dangerous candidate from ascending to the presidency. Looking back on 2016, even with all of my intentions, even with my fulfillment of the ritual of voting, one of the most important things that we can do to participate in this society, voting, I still had not done enough. In the Haftarah that usually accompanies this week's Torah portion, Tzav, our reading of the prophets, our Haftarah, the prophet Jeremiah exclaims God's fury toward the people because of the sacrifices that they are making. But God isn't displeased because the Israelites were confused on how to implement the system of sacrifices. God is angry because the people have confused the purpose of the sacrifices. Channeling God's anger, Jeremiah preaches, "Add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifices and eat the meat." In a prophetic style of a major insult, Jeremiah is saying that the people's sacrifices have become so worthless, they might as well just do all the sacrifices together and get them over with. Jeremiah continues, "On the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak with them or command them concerning burnt offerings or sacrifice." Now, this isn't saying that God never commanded us to perform sacrifices, because we see that very clearly in last week's portion, in this week's portion, and in many parshiot to come. Rashi, one of our commentators, explains that Jeremiah here is referring back to Exodus, saying that the system of sacrifices came after God freed the Israelites and reestablished their covenant with one another. Essentially, performing the sacrifices alone, without any of the deeper work involved, just isn't enough. As Rabbi Rachel Joseph notes, Jeremiah calls out the people for their empty rituals. He is reminding us that the sacrificial system is not the goal of the covenant, but rather a vehicle through which the people can express their relationship with God. This elaborate system of ritual sacrifice is the culminating act of a larger commitment. Voting, again, one of the most important things that we can do to participate in this society, one of our most important American rituals, voting is the culminating act of a much, much larger commitment to creating a country and world where every person lives with dignity, justice, love, and wholeness. As we continue to get closer and closer to this election in November, what would it look like to heed the words of Jeremiah? For us, all of us here tonight, all of us here in this community, to take seriously the ritual of voting. And for us to see that moment of filling in those tiny bubbles and submitting our ballot, to see that moment as the culmination of months of work to encourage others to vote, to counter misinformation about the election, to advocate for the issues we care most about in our lives. Since January, more than 100 members of CBE have started connecting with various organizations run by members of CBE themselves to start this wholly important work. We are sending postcards to encourage people to vote, signing up to be poll workers, and coming up in just a couple of weeks on Sunday, April 14th, I'll be driving to Philadelphia with other folks here to knock on doors and to get even more people prepared to vote in this year's election. And more is yet to come. So please, watch your emails, check the website, and let's start fulfilling our commitment, not in November, but right now. After receiving all of these intricate instructions for ritual sacrifice, our ancestors began to be so concerned with the holy act itself, they forgot that it was a culmination of a larger commitment to God and to living out goodness in the world. The words of the prophet Jeremiah shook them out of that position, reminding them of the bigger purpose. For us, voting is a necessary, holy act that has the power to change our country and our world. And when we make our way to the polls this year, may it be the culmination of weeks and months of work, showing our much larger commitment to building the world as it should be. Shabbat Shalom.